Kate Falcha, welcome back to Irish Granny Tarot. This is our Saturday book, and we're doing the 8 Laws of Change by Stephan Schwartz. And I strongly recommend you look at video 1, and we're going to move on right away here to video number 2. We're starting with chapter 6, Anonymous Power. Then Schwartz tells the story of his friend. This also blew my mind. So this is his friend Douglas Dean, who was an English chemist and considered an eccentric. He was a Quaker conscientious objector during World War II. He volunteered as a bomb warden in London, and this is law number 6. The individuals in the group must forswear violence in word, act, or thought. So what they had to do was hunt for, transport unexploded bombs that had landed in the city, take them to a safe disposal point where experts would safely detonate them. Sometimes they exploded in the trucks and killed the guys who did this work. After the war, Douglas Dean worked with the Friends, the Quaker Service Council, aiding displaced refugees in Europe. They helped reunite families, and if you've read any first-person narratives of what that was like, it was utterly harrowing. They provided the basics of shelter, food, water, sanitation. Schwartz realized that this was the work, one day that it clicked, this was the work that the 1947 Nobel Peace Prize earned. It was given to the British Friends Service Council in conjunction with the American Friends Service Council. And he thought to himself, wait a minute, you worked for the Friends Service Council? His friend, he had no idea, his friend was a co-recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. And he'd known him for 7 years. He had never mentioned it, never talked about it again. Schwartz brought it up and said, did you get the Nobel Peace Prize? And he said, well, you know, it was an agreement that was made, that we took it as a group and no individual would be known, but I belonged to the group. So he never talked about it again. And when he died, Schwartz wrote the obituary. And the editor called him up and said, I don't believe this. What do you mean he won the Nobel Prize? It's not in his CV, like his bio. So Schwartz said, well, this is what he told me, and he wasn't a fabulist. So Schwartz called Oslo to talk to the Nobel people. And the Quakers had accepted the prize. The group that his friend Douglas Dean belonged to had accepted the prize. But they had a caveat that no individual would take public credit. I love that. So let me read this to you. He said, okay, and they wouldn't tell him did he win the prize, because they had agreed they would not take public credit and the Nobel Committee would not name names. So Schwartz said, okay, I'll give it one more shot. Can you check this for me? If I were to say that Douglas Dean was a recipient of the 47 prize as part of the British Friends Service Council, would the committee have any objections? And she said, well, I'll call you back and I'll let you know. So she called back and she says, I'm instructed to tell you that if you were to write that the committee, had given that prize, that we would find no objections to that statement. So he realized that this was the 4th law, that nobody would get credit or acknowledgement for what they had done, and they'd be authentically okay with that. So the Quakers were very committed to this, and the person who accepted this prize on behalf of the Quakers said this in his speech: to examine in closer detail the individual relief schemes would not give any of us deeper insight into its significance, for it's not in the extent of their work or in its practical form that the Quakers have given most to the people that they've met. It's in the spirit in which this work is performed. We were not set out to make converts, a young Quaker says. We've come out for a definite purpose to build up a spirit of love, what had been destroyed in a spirit of hatred. We're not missionaries. They were seeking life-affirming goals, not seeking to convert anybody. So if you do something good, and this is a tenet of the Jewish faith, any charitable work you do, you're not supposed to take credit for it. You're not supposed to donate a wing at the hospital with your name over the wing. You're not supposed to do that. You donate it anonymously. The true value of good works is in their anonymity. So you have to be willing to do the work, even if nobody ever knows that you've done it. This is true power. Power doesn't come for jockeying for credit. It comes from doing the good work. And it's actually a gift to allow somebody else to take the credit. And that's tough for our little egos. Law number 4, you can serve the goal even when you are unaware of your role in the life-affirming change. Just you do the goal because it's the goal, which is that you accept the fact that you may never get credit. So early in the 60s, Schwartz worked for a law firm while waiting for a job with the National Geographic. I guess they were going to hire him, but there was a date. And meanwhile, he needed to pay the rent, so he was working for a law firm, and he learned about national power structures, who you know, and your access is what gives you influence in government. He met an elevator operator named Rosa, and he said she had just a great smile. And that happened at work. He met her every day, see her driving the elevator. He also played poker with a group of young staffers, aides and junior lawyers and the sort. One of them was an aide to a senator who opposed benefits and safety for union workers. So one day, Schwartz gets in the elevator and he met this aide and the senator going up. The senator was on his way to a political meeting, and the conversation between the aide and the senator was really obvious that he was a politician and that he was planning to vote no on this labor bill. And he met him again going down and later in the day, and it was obvious that he was still planning on voting no on the bill at the start of the ride down. So they're in the elevator, they're going down. He's had this meeting, he's committed to voting no, he hates unions. Standing in this elevator, he dropped his gold pen on the ground on the floor of the elevator. Rosa, the elevator operator, who spoke almost no English, picked it up and gave it to him and smiled at him. And later that day, this anti-union senator voted yes, pro-union. So Schwartz was friends with the senator's aide, and he said, what's up with that? How did that happen? And the aide told him about the elevator ride encounter and how that had affected. Let's see if I can find it here. He said it was the elevator operator, he told Schwartz. You remember when the senator dropped his pen and she picked it up? On the way back in the cab, the senator was very quiet, and just as we were going up to the hill, he said to me, Jonathan, this is the aide, Jonathan, if I vote against this, a lot of women like that elevator operator won't be smiling. Wives, daughters, nieces, aunts. It's an election year. Maybe we need to rethink this. And as we talked, the senator began marshaling the argument for the bill. And the aide said by the time we got back to the office, he was calling other senators, and it was just hardball politics, but that woman made the difference. She got him started thinking in a new direction. He said he didn't have Spanish to explain to Rosa what she had done. But I've never forgotten her smile, or what I saw and heard. That ride in Rosa's elevator taught me that even when we don't know it, and there's no logical reason to believe that it could be so, there are times when just our beingness makes the wheel of destiny turn. So, Chapter 7, the power of nonviolence. As I said before, Stephan Schwartz has met everybody, so this is going to come as no surprise. In 1968, he had a friend named Ishwar Sharma, and he was an academic from India, and they met at a conference, at the Edgar Cayce organization in Virginia Beach. And if you remember Schwartz's story of his background, I recommend going back to the discussion I had with him, the chat we had. He tells an unbelievable story. I won't spoil it. No spoilers here. You can go back and, if you don't have time to watch it, scroll through the transcript below the video and you'll find the story of his time in Virginia Beach and how he ended up there. So he's at a conference in Virginia Beach and he meets this academic. He said he seemed like a rigorous intellectual with just a deep spiritual bent. And they became good friends, and because of him, Schwartz mastered the comparison of Western and Eastern religions. This guy was kind of an expert. And he studied the nature of consciousness as it expressed itself in beingness. Well, at 26, Schwartz had been studying meditation and consciousness in experimental science. He says, I was waking up, and this guy exposed me. He was such an expert, he exposed me to become knowledgeable myself. And this day in 1968, they were just sitting talking and sharing what influenced them. And Schwartz talked about hearing Martin Luther King's dream speech in D.C. And Sharma said, well, when I was 6, my uncle was in the Salt March. And that happened in 1930, and it led to independence of India from England. And it began my study of Gandhi. So what was the Salt March? This is interesting. Gandhi came to nonviolence through Thoreau, the book Civil Disobedience. And in 1942, he met American Civil Liberty Union chairman Roger Baldwin on a train. And Baldwin told let me get this right. And he was told that Gandhi said that Thoreau's words contained the essence of his political philosophy, especially in relation of the citizens to the government. So Thoreau, and you know, we all thought Thoreau was great when we were 16, and then we realized that he lived within walking distance of his parents' house and access to, you know, plumbing. And it kind of colored my attitude about him. But circling back to Thoreau and civil disobedience, he had an immediate important influence on Gandhi. And Gandhi was really interested in his description of the relationship between the government and the individual. Gandhi was looking for a nonviolent way to bring about change. And the Indian people were just tired of accommodating their English overlords, the Raj, and they wanted something simple and universal that they could do to get their point across without violence. So why should Indians, they decided, be paying for salt taxes to England when the entire continent was surrounded by salt water and all they had to do was go to the beach? So he wrote a letter to his adversary, the English viceroy. Let me find it here. And he said, "Dear friend, I cannot intentionally hurt anything that lives, much less fellow human beings, even though they may do the greatest wrong to me and mine. Whilst therefore I hold the British rule to be a curse, I do not intend harm to a single Englishman or to any legitimate interest he may have in India." This is a pure statement of Gandhi's personal commitment to the sixth law. The individuals in the group must forswear violence in word, act, or thought. So he recruited 78 men from his ashram, and they began a 240-mile walk. And this attracted thousands along the way, including Sharma, the academic Schwartz made friends with, his 20-year-old uncle, who joined the Salt March. So the group had been trained ahead of time, the core group, in nonviolence, and they passed that information on to the people who joined along the way. So let's see here. They were trained like soldiers, but they were trained in expressing their collective beingness. And they were told, you must not use any violence under any circumstance. You will be beaten, but you must not resist. You must not even raise a hand to ward off blows. And so off they went, and they wanted to combine these 4 laws of the 8 laws of change, Gandhi did, without really realizing that that's exactly what he was doing. So one of the foreign observers that was there described what happened to these marchers and put it in the newspaper, and it went all around the world. And a U.S. senator got that article and had it put into the congressional record. And, you know, this is before the internet, long, long before the internet, 1930. And there's a description of what happened to these people. They were viciously beaten. It was really terrible. It was awful, a bloody mess, and they just kept on going. So this happened for all day. You know, they were stepping over bodies. So as a result of them being able to get it into the congressional record and get it publicized and get it into international papers, the English lost moral authority in India. Sharma's uncle, who was 20, he came home and he told the 6-year-old about it. And that 6-year-old, Sharma, dedicated his life at that moment as a 6-year-old to nonviolence. And then Nehru, who became, I believe, the first, I don't know if it was Prime Minister? Yes, Prime Minister after independence from England, said this: these movements exercised tremendous pressure on the British government and shook the government machinery, but the real importance lay in the effect they had on our own people, and especially the village masses. Non-cooperation dragged them out of the mire and gave them self-respect and self-reliance. They acted courageously and did not submit so easily to unjust oppression. Their outlook widened, and they began to think a little in terms of India as a whole. It was a remarkable transformation, and the Congress under Gandhi's leadership must have credit for it. And this resonates with MLK, who said, like most people, I had heard of Gandhi, but I had never studied him seriously. As I read, I became deeply fascinated by his campaigns of nonviolent resistance. I was particularly moved by his salt march to the sea and his numerous fasts. The whole concept of satyagraha. Satya is truth that equals love. Graha is force, so it's the force of love. Was profoundly significant to me. As I delved deeper into the philosophy of Gandhi, my skepticism concerning the power of love gradually diminished, and I came to see for the first time its potency in the area of social reform. So Sharma became a saint in a religious movement, the Maravta Mandir Temple in India, the Humanity Temple, and I looked it up, and sure enough, there he is. So Schwartz said, who'd have known that my friend would become a saint? And he's just was a very humble person. He died not too long ago. Chapter 8, taking the long view. So while reading Benjamin Franklin's letters that he wrote in his late 70s, his years of late 70s, to Washington, who was in his 60s, about supplies for the troops and for negotiating money away from corrupt hands to get money for the troops, the revolutionary troops, Schwartz saw how Washington was holding together an army by sheer force of intention. Army in quotations. Franklin and Washington were older than the other revolutionaries. Jefferson was 36. Madison was 32. Washington and Franklin were self-made men. And they appreciated this in each other. They were pseudo-peers. Schwartz over time began to see that Franklin had a very different light. He saw him in a different light. His life's work was sort of unnoticed as a force for good. Yeah, he's known as a figure in the American Revolution, and You children are taught, you know, Benjamin Franklin kites, you know. There's so much more to what he did. He was prescient. He was present in things that we have today that didn't exist before Franklin started them. Modern social clubs, fire departments, the insurance companies, clean water for, you know, urban areas, and sanitation, public hospitals. So, and there's more which we're going to get to. But Schwartz began to realize every single day, he began to notice every single day, many times a day, he benefited from the work of Benjamin Franklin, who went unheralded for it. If you belong to the Rotary, you work in an emergency room, you volunteer as a fireman, or you work in a small town library, you are one of Franklin's spiritual heirs. And if you use these services, you're one of Franklin's beneficiaries. His presence is woven deep into the fabric of our lives. He invented our culture, what we would recognize as being an American town, our culture. He set creative processes into motion. He was not drawn to political intellectualizing. He left that to the others of the Enlightenment. He thought about practical, daily things. And he knew that change can be forced and ephemeral, or transformation would come from within personal choice that endures. So he created a model of what we now recognize as American citizenship, the participatory model. He had a scientific mind, and he knew where the data led. He discovered electricity. He discovered the Gulf Stream. He saw that people joined in small groups, and that groups linked to form a community and to form a network that supported democracy. And he learned early that technical sophistication has power, and that personal choice creates character. And if you have lots of people making personal choices beneficial to positive character, in the thousands, you'll develop a national character of virtuous citizens. And that's a quote from Franklin. I have always thought, Franklin once wrote to a friend, that one man of tolerable abilities may work great changes and accomplish great affairs among mankind, if he first forms a good plan and makes the execution of that same plan his sole study. So simple things in self-interest with a common intention of other people let the individuals coalesce into things like the fire department and the hospital and sanitation. So he nudged us into what we now know is middle class. He encouraged upward mobility. He did not believe in hereditary privilege. He believed strongly in the separation of church and state. He supported religious tolerance, but he also supported the absence of religion. He supported urban technology, and he was sentimental about the family as a core group, about honesty, integrity, but he had humor. He was not a solemn creature. And this attitude still exists today in Schwartz's first law. So a successful democracy requires people of good character that are proud to be together. And the power of beingness linked to social classes and generations across boundaries to manifest shared values, what it means to be an American citizen, creates culture. And this is the 8th law. Individuals and the group collectively must always act from the beingness of life-affirming integrity. So to manifest shared values in a cultural thing is the 8th law, and the priority is social wellness. And he advocated for things like, and he made them happen, things like public baths and He was renowned for his cleanliness at a time when people didn't necessarily bathe every day, and his clothes were always clean. People remarked about it all the time. And he started all kinds of public parks. In his will, and this is just incredible, I did not know this, in his will, he invented a concept called micro-lending, which won the Nobel Prize in 2006 to a guy named Muhammad Yunus. But Franklin died in 1790, April 17th, 1790. And he applied these laws unwittingly. In a codicil to his will, he created 2 philanthropic trusts. He bequeathed $1,000 each to 2 different cities, Boston and Philadelphia. And the trusts were set up to last 200 years. And he described what he wanted done, and he described it in extreme detail. For Philadelphia, it was for municipal improvements and microloans to help young artificers, creators, to start their own businesses. I guess you'd call them entrepreneurs. And for 100 years, this went on. So until the late 1800s, he helped hundreds of people. At the centennial of his death, his descendants went after the money. And there's a description of what they did, and it was just nefarious, greed. And it failed. And they appealed. But because of the appeal, it failed again, and the trusts continued, but it helped to create new laws to assure that charitable trusts went on in perpetuity, if that's how they were set up originally. So his philanthropic model has spread across the world. His personal life was easygoing and relaxed and humorous, and he was the ambassador to France, and I guess he had a lot of fun in France. I remember when I was a little girl, I was in the 4th grade, there used to be a radio program once a week about great people in American history, and it was done chronologically. So I remember so distinctly the hour that we listened while they talked about Benjamin Franklin. It made a huge impression on me. And they hinted, that he was a naughty boy in France. I don't remember how they actually worded it, but I didn't really fully understand what they were talking about, but I knew I liked him. I knew this man had a sense of humor, and he was beloved, and there were many admirable qualities about him. He lived the 7th law, which was make your private life consistent with your public posture. And he warned of spies that were out to discredit him. And because it drove people crazy that he was so inherently decent. And he said that his one rule was this: to be concerned in no affairs that I should blush to have made public, and to do nothing but what spies may see and welcome. If I was sure, therefore, that my valet de place was a spy, as probably he is, and he was, I think I should not discharge him for that, if in other respects I like him. So he was like, of course there are spies, but I don't do anything that I'm afraid spies are going to find out about. And if I like someone who's a spy, and I don't care, I'll still continue to support them. Apparently there were rumors of infidelity, but I think he and his wife may have had an open marriage. I don't think there was anything of subterfuge going on. He was quite open about it. So he clearly stated how he had no use for money, but he wasn't about to impose ideological views either. He knew as a quality of life improved for large numbers of people, that it was important to think bigger and make attempts to do more, and that this was a very optimistic attitude, that individuals making small choices, individual choices in the aggregate shape character, and they serve a large community good. So Franklin, oh, I put this in parentheses, and I have already mentioned that he was unusual in that he bathed every day. He owned a bathtub, which was shocking, and he created public baths. So his money that he put in trust led to baths, to Franklin Park in Boston, to the Franklin trade schools. I mean, it just continued to go on and do good work. To the Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology that had a 4-year program and has had so far more than 85,000 students. To, in Philadelphia, the Franklin Institute that established a library, museum, educational programs, public baths, and hundreds of personal loans, all life-affirming choices. So he set this impulse into motion. This is how it's done, you know. And the trusts ended in 1990, but the institutes still exist and are generating their own funding. So the beingness of Franklin set in action by his intention and the choices of this one man are still having a positive effect today. And the next story is a mind-boggler. I knew nothing about this. You know, it's just fascinating. Chapter 9, Greenpeace. So it's considered an international ecological nonprofit, non-governmental NGO. And it started from a small Canadian group called Don't Make a Wave that formed early in the 1970s in Vancouver, British Columbia. But now, Greenpeace exists in 40 countries with a headquarters in Amsterdam. It has addressed a wide variety of issues. Started out with French nuclear tests, and then it went on to the redwoods and whales. At sea, they tried to stop whaling, and they never have, never will, had money from governments or corporations. They have no political affiliation. Their budget is 100% donations. They have more than 3 million small donors, and then private foundations. They have even refused money from sources they felt went against this ethical benchmark for them. They have a very in-your-face attitude about what they do. They've been attacked by some entities in the public for this. They've gone after corporations which threatened corporate profit. They've gone after governments which serve corporate interest. And they had a ship called the Arctic Sunrise that was taken by the Russian government. They released it, and it was taken by Spain. Their inflatable boats have been rammed, which is about maybe putting yourself at risk, but you're doing the right thing. They joined 200,000 Canarians, these are people from the Canary Islands, against the oil company Repsol that wanted to do offshore drilling off the Canary Islands. And the environmentalists feared a spill that, like the one that happened in the Gulf of Mexico, that could destroy both their economy, which depends on tourism and the beaches, but could also destroy the marine ecosystem. So Greenpeace, in public and private, are consistent. They usually do really well in court when they're sued by corporations, which they often are. They do well in court because they don't have scandals. They're not about making profit. They're not about being famous. They don't own, you know, they're not Wayne LaPierre, let's put it that way. So in the fall of 2007, they took an action against the Kings North Power Station in England, which is a carbon-based energy power plant that was condemned by the leading father of the climate movement, James Hansen. Said that they were coming to conclusions that were madness to propose a new generation of power plants based on burning coal, the dirtiest, most polluting of all fossil fuels. We need a moratorium on the construction of these coal-fired power plants and phase out the ones that exist. And Greenpeace had 6 activists break into the power station early in the morning, October 8th, 2008. And they were attempting to paint down the length of a 650-foot chimney. Gordon Bennett, in other words, Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister Bennett, threw it in the trash. And the light was so poor that it took them too long to do it, and they got caught. And at the trial, they were charged with malicious damage totaling 30,000 pounds, $47,000. To the surprise of many, testifying in their defense was Zach Goldsmith, environmental advisor to David Cameron, who was the leader of the Conservative Party, and later became Prime Minister. And also testifying was an Inuit leader from Greenland. Both testified that human mediated climate change was already degrading life on Earth, and that it was going to get worse if present practices continued. So the jury acquitted Greenpeace. They said they were legally protected because they did some damage by painting words to prevent far greater damage that would hurt the entire globe. Greenpeace has been attacked by the American right wing. They've had multiple IRS audits, but they're totally on the up and up, and there's been nothing to find. Schwartz talked to the co-founder, Rex Weiler, and he gave him the Greenpeace definitive history, he said. He is a Pulitzer nominee. He lives on a remote British Columbian island. When he was asked what makes a group rise up for social change, he said that he, as a kid, was affected by The Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, and The Closing Circle, Rachel Carson, and The Closing Circle by Barry Commoner. And he became a peace activist against Vietnam, a Vietnamese resistor, which is why he went to Canada. So he saw the peace movement won, a peaceful movement, and he saw how it was a life-affirming social change, and it woke him up, and he became consciously looking at the world, and he saw all of our horrible choices that we make. So in 1972, he had fled to Vancouver, and he became a journalist for a small liberal paper. And they liked his ecological articles, and a guy called, they liked the ecological articles of a guy called Bob Hunter. And Rex, is that his name? Did I get it right? Rex called Hunter and told him, I really admire your work. And they met at a bar, and they spent 4 hours talking, drinking beer and talking ecology. Hunter told Rex Weiler about this group, Don't Make Waves, that was begun by Jewish Quaker couple, Dorothy and Irving Stowe, that Stowe had been in the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA, during World War II. But the bombs in Japan woke him up, and because of Vietnam, they decided to move away, and they moved to Canada. He had 3 media friends, and together, Hunter, who wrote for the Vancouver Sun, and Dorothy and Ben Metcalf, who were both reporters for Reuters, they traveled pre-World War II, and they worked for other media organizations after World War II in Europe. And they were all passionate about ecology and the environment, and they were known pretty well on Canadian broadcasting radio and television. So this Don't Make Waves group in 1971 protested and stopped nuclear testing off the Aleutian chain. And in 1972-73, they protested the French nuclear tests in the South Pacific. This takes courage to do non-violently, and eventually had repercussions, which we'll talk about. I guess we'll talk about it right now. The French Navy sank their boat, the Rainbow Warrior, when it was in dock in Auckland, New Zealand in 1985. And it was actually considered an act by the French Navy of state terrorist bombing, that they did that to the Rainbow Warrior. The French called this secret operation Operation Satanique. And there was a photographer on board the ship who drowned. They got off the boat and he went back on to save his camera equipment, and he drowned because they actually let off 2 bombs. And the first one went on, the bomb exploded. Everybody got off the boat. He went back to rescue his equipment as the boat was sinking, and they exploded another bomb and he died. And 2 of the French agents, this was Mitterrand, by the way, who was responsible. 2 of the French agents got 10 years for manslaughter. So the Vancouver group got together with Quakers at that point, and they formed Greenpeace. And they inherently understood beingness. They had a collective intention, and the individual choices that they made were consistent. They had no personal scandals, and they preferred to remain anonymous. So the nuclear threat began lifting as global consciousness shifted, thanks a lot to them. And it took 3 decades. It went from 1963 with the partial test ban to 1996 with Kennedy and Khrushchev in 1990, the partial test ban. In 96, the International Court of Justice ruled that there exists an obligation to pursue in good faith and bring to a conclusion negotiations leading to nuclear disarmament in all its aspects under strict and effective international control. So now Greenpeace had effectively brought about positive change, and they moved on to the issue of the ecology. Metcalf, one of the members, bought a billboard, and it said, "Ecology, look it up. You're involved." So they're of one mind about the destruction of the environment, that the earth was a network of life and that we were obligated to protect it, and they were willing to assume the risks and to do it anonymously. So the group that Weiler worked with for years felt that social movements were no-brainers, that social movements like the Civil Rights March, women's rights, that protecting the environment could be like gender and racial equality, that this could be done. At the end of this meeting, Stowe said, they had this meeting to talk about it, and at the end of this meeting, Stowe said, "Okay, we're done. Thanks, everybody. Peace." And somebody from the back, an ecologist named Darnell, a young guy, said, "Make that green piece," because it was about the environment. And everyone just stopped in their tracks and went, "Oh my God, that's genius. That name has special power." So it created attention, and it drew in natural alliances. It worked in the media. It was snappy. It was identifiable. And, they wanted to end violence, peace, and they wanted to preserve nature, the green. So the first idea they had was to do mind bombs, which today would be called going viral, to have information that would make a global impact. And it had to be dramatic to get on broadcast news. So there was this moment of synchronicity. They met a guy called Paul Spong in New Zealand, who was a neuroscientist and a cetologist, C-E-T-A, cetologist, about whales. And he had been studying whales, which were being driven into extinction by hunting. And this became their new campaign. This was something that they could personalize the whales, make them a sympathetic cause, get people's heartstrings involved. They could see what was being done. They could take pictures of the hideousness of it and motivate people to rise up. And this would have larger environmental effect. So they decided to confront whaling, the actual whaling fleet at sea. And they knew it would appall people to see what they did to them. And they would show that we had to protect them. We have an obligation, and show what humanity was doing specifically to a part of nature. They wanted to show the industrial power of the modern whaling industry that was destroying whales. They wanted to show whales as sentient beings wake up public sentiment and drive policy change. So they found an accountant to help with finances, to plan for future growth, just to be above board and not be stupid about any donations they got, and 100% committed to absolute integrity. They got big law firms in Vancouver who donated their time to be absolutely 100% above board with legal matters. These corporations had all the money in the world to sue them endlessly, and so they countered that by being honest, legal, and getting donated support. They got advice and defense pro bono. So they were in a solid position as far as organizational foundation went, and they were able to meld practicality with their radicalism. Weiler says the success was because they were working in service of life-affirming truth. In 1975, they confronted the Russian whalers in rubber boats, and they put their boats between the whales and the harpoonists. They were firing harpoons over their heads. Eventually, they found a captain with a big boat who was disillusioned by the decline of fishing. And he was a very experienced sailor and navigator, and he took them and their boats, their rubber boats, out to the fleet with these harpoons flying overhead. And they got stills and they got film, and a small PR company decided to go ahead and put it out there, and it worked. And then this old captain had told them, you know, this is madness, but their bravery at sea was just absolutely amazing against these Russian whalers, and it went around the globe. And Weiler, Schwartz asked Weiler, where does that moral sense come from? And he said, those people all had a sense of compassion and truth and beauty. It wasn't ideological, it wasn't theological, it was a clear, simple truth, and it took courage, but they were dedicated to it. People will coalesce around individuals whose very nature reveals their decency and their commitment to truth. This is what that skeptic said about Mother Teresa. He was a skeptic till he met her, and he could feel that numinance. Nature, the nature of their being, the genuineness, prompts others to emulate them. And you know, this is not in the book, but we talk about, you put that loving energy out there, people feel it. When he talked about beauty, he meant a lack of affectation and naturalness, not posturing, working in favor of life and not putting on airs and being, you know, a publicity hound or whatever. Martin Luther King's an example. All people had to do was just stand there and listen to him talk, and they could feel it. Gandhi was the same. There are many others not known at all, but you recognize them when you hear them talk the truth. And it's why the women's movement will succeed, because misogyny is not true. I mean, it's basic. So how can anyone be against a healthy planet? Yeah, it's common sense, but we prioritize money. So at the start, people just were beginning to wake up to this, the start of this whole movement. There was just not enough people to express the truth, to put it out there. So they had to act to be more noticeable, to be more memorable. But they couldn't lose their humility. And they say that often movements get self-righteous, and I talked about the Black Panthers the other day, and I think you can see some of that. Some of this applies to the Black Panthers. They started out with these great intentions, and things just got bad. And it's a good example of how really worthwhile, valuable organizations who do a lot of good can get derailed. It all becomes an ego thing and a cult, and people want credit or acknowledgement, or they try to profit from it. And get famous. They want to be successful in the work of social change. But to be successful in the work of social change, you cannot expect notoriety, acclaim, credit, reward. You cannot. Righteousness does not equal recognition. So to do the right thing, you have to do it for its own sake and not seek praise. That's law number 4. So you just speak the truth in a natural way. And you may not have exact goals, you just speak the truth. And you don't seek praise, and you have the courage to challenge conventional wisdom and power. People react when they see this happening. When others do it, people notice. They take note. And Schwartz says he saw spirituality in us. This is involved in something greater than yourself. It's more important and fundamental than yourself. Social change and success in social change is not about money and power. You need truth, humility, critical thinking, beauty and courage, not be concerned about credit, have a tolerance for mystery. You may not fully understand how everything is working, but it does. And you have to have serious, patient commitment. So now we're on chapter 10, the issue of authority. He talks about the Milgram experiment in Yale in 1961 and how they shocked people. They had, I think everyone's familiar with it. I'm not going to describe the whole experiment, but it's where they did a study of the psychology of following orders, basically, and they were shocked by the banality of I'm just following orders. People were willing to give shocks to strangers in another room, remotely give them shocks and hearing screaming, thinking they were going to die, but continue to give them because they were given orders. They wanted to basically explore the obedience people had to authority. How we react to beingness in an authoritarian mode. Why did people follow Hitler? That kind of thing. MAGA. So they set up a teacher-learner situation with that electric shock, and they got shocked every time they made a mistake in some question thing, and they were told it was to aid their memory. But they set up a fake electric chair in the other room. They showed the shock givers this electric chair in the other room, and it still didn't dissuade them. And when they went into this experiment, they predicted that no one would get a shock beyond a certain point. And the people ostensibly in the electric chair with the door shut getting the shock were told to scream louder and louder and then stop screaming like they had died. And 65% of the people gave a lethal dose. So they tried changing the approach. They did medium settings. They put lab coats on in a relaxed office. And what they discovered was this situation of authority meeting moral integrity, moral imperative head on. And there is an extreme willingness to of adults to go to almost any length on the command of an authority. The only student who refused was shocked to find out that his close friend had gone along with it. So there was somebody who refused, but we really haven't changed. They repeated the study in 2006, got the same results, and the conclusion was that there are situational forces that have a much greater impact on our behavior than most people recognize. For example, what was done to the prisoners at Abu Ghraib. So this is also a single-minded intentionality whose intensity others find irresistible, a state of beingness, whether their intent is good or bad. And it's subjective to the individual experience and the critical consensus by others that it's genuine. And this very possibly these sorts of experiments can give us some insight into how the brain works. So Hitler and Stalin were dark geniuses, but they were good at this negative effect on people. And there are good geniuses who are equally good in the positive effect on people. But so the question is, what produces the great man? And by great man, we mean significant historical figures, not necessarily good people, but great in the sense of well-known, big, like Napoleon, like Hitler. Well, Carl Jung had an opinion, as he often does. He said, to appreciate how Hitler came to power, it was necessary to realize that Hitler did not lead the German people. Hitler was the German people. He was the personification of a popular critical consensus. Albert Speer agreed. He says it's a mystery, but the fact is it's impossible to explain Germany before 33 and from 33 to 45 without Hitler. He was the center of it all and always remains the center. Most Germans didn't really know about the final solution. Not true. Recent research flatly contradicts that, and it supports Jung. The mass of ordinary Germans did know about the terror of the Holocaust. And as a peculiarly sensitive resonator in that moment of history, Hitler personified and gave voice to the dark pool of anger and humiliation felt by that portion of the human race self-defined as German. This is the power of dark genius and the results that flow from the linkage, local and non-local, when collective culture beingness springs from the shadow. And the Milgram experiment saw the essence of the problem clearly. Ordinary people simply doing their jobs and without any particular hostility on their part can become agents in a terrible destructive process. Moreover, even when the destructive effects of their work become patently clear and they are asked to carry out actions incomparable with fundamental standards of morality, relatively few people have the resources needed to resist authority. So, to be an agent of change, you have to explore your own response to authority. This is an existential test of character. You need clear values and a well thought out plan of action. This is something that we can all do on an individual basis right now. So I'm going to stop. This is the end of video number 2, and we'll begin video number 3 here right away. And I hope you're enjoying this. I find this riveting information. Slán go fóill. Slánte.